Our next speaker is Manuel Pais. Manuel comes from DevOps, is a DevOps and IT consultant, but he shook things quite up when he and Matthew Skelton released their book about team topologies in 2019. I think many of you at least know the title of the book because we also use it at AXO to design teams or to discuss team organization. But today you will speak on a little bit different topic, so please join me on stage, Manuel.
Thank you. Thanks.
So thanks again for coming here from Spain, from Madrid, yesterday night. So what would you like to know us about before you start with your talk?
Well, thank you, first of all, for the invitation. Seems like a great conference and a great place for people to make connections and meet other colleagues. First of all, I wish more organizations would do this kind of events. I'm a software engineer at heart, at my background, and probably like many of you, then I went into consulting roles. So I think we probably share that kind of experience. And over time, because I've always been curious and tried different roles and different teams, I started getting this, which you probably also have seen many times, problems where teams don't interact or don't understand what other teams exist, what is our purpose of the team. And so that led me to focus more and more on organization of teams and essentially trying to bring some of the principles from engineering into how we organize teams.
Thank you. So the stage is yours.
Thank you. So following up on that, I've had experience in different roles. I started as developer, I've been tester, team lead. I did a bunch of consulting around DevOps, continuous delivery. And that was where a lot of these ideas and patterns that we write about in the book, in team topologies, came up. So like I said, we are really looking with our engineering background, what are actually the patterns and anti-patterns, and what are some of the first principles that we should apply to how we organize teams, right? To be more efficient, but also for teams to feel more engaged, to feel like they have a better understanding of what do we do, what are we here to do in the organization, how should we interact with others. So I quite like this quote. It sort of resonates with how I think about the ideas in team topologies. Essentially, tools, concepts, and some base patterns to think about how do we structure organizations for a more efficient digital operating model. And then a couple of years ago, we published this workbook. I think I'm having the same microphone problems as before, right? So the remote book is about bringing some practical ways in which we can apply the ideas from team topology, especially in a remote working environment. So today, what I wanted to really focus is this. Like, a lot of people feel like this, right? This cognitive overload. They feel like, I can't even lift up my head. Thank you. All right, better. A lot of people and a lot of teams end up feeling like this, that we're so overloaded. There's so much we need to worry about, that we need to be concerned, that you just want to stop sometimes. And actually last year, by the end of last year, there was a study and they found that 56% of IT professionals can't relax after their working day. That sounds pretty bad. And also 44%, so nearly 1 in 2 people in our industry experience burnout. So that's quite alarming, I would say. We should do something about this. A lot of the times, I believe this is due to the amount of responsibilities, of increased responsibilities and demands that are being put in individuals and teams. And maybe part of that has to do with obviously this whole digital transformation approach, the fact that almost every organization today is focused on their digital products or services. And as John Cutler, who rightfully says, already 5 years ago, he was saying great digital products emerge from empowered, fully cross-functional teams. So yes, this is the way that we want to get to, quick adaptation, quick delivery, understanding customer needs and all these things. So we'll come back to how do we deal with the overload, the cognitive overload. But essentially, if we want fast flow, if we want to be able to respond quickly to customers, we probably need this type of fully cross-functional teams. In team topologies, we call this stream-aligned teams. Similar to product teams, it's just the reason to use streams is that usually you have large products, so you need to identify within a large product what are the different sort of independent streams of value to the customers and to the users, right? But what's key here is to understand this type of teams, ideally, for fast flow of delivery of value, they should have end-to-end ownership of this stream, whatever that might be. That might be a user journey, might be a set of functionalities within a large product. Whatever that stream is, for fast flow, you would like this team to have end-to-end ownership. If you think about principles from DevOps, for example, fast feedback, small, quick iterations, this team would be able to deliver that faster than any other team, in the sense that they can understand the customers, they can decide what we need to build or what we need to do. They can put that into the actual product or service, and they can get feedback and iterate as soon as possible. Essentially, you have the full life cycle within the team, and there are no need to handoffs of work to other teams, right? So let's say this is, in a way, our ideal if we want fast flow, fast delivery of value, which is effectively one of the key, let's say, goals of team topologies, is how do we organize for fast flow of value, right? And there might be situations where we don't want to organize for fast flow of value, but those tend to be less and less because, there's more and more competition. The other aspect that sometimes is forgotten is we need constant or very rapid feedback from the actual systems that we're running or services we are delivering. So these are the two objectives of when we talk about team topologies and how we organize teams. Now, a key thing to achieve fast flow of delivery of value is that teams have to have a clear mission, right? I don't know if people have seen, who has seen the movie Tetris? A few people? I liked it. Maybe, I hope you liked it too. It's an American movie, so it's very exaggerated, but basically this guy is on a mission to get the distribution rights for the Tetris game, which was developed in the Soviet Union, right? So he goes through all kinds of challenges, but he's really determined to get the distribution rights for the Game Boy at the time, and so on. So I see a lot of teams don't have this type of clarity. Why are we here? What is exactly our mission? I see a lot of teams that are trying to cater for many different customers, and it becomes just, again, an overload for those teams. Who should we answer to? Who decides about the priorities? All these types of problems, right? Without a clear and a stable mission, teams are sort of constantly drifting. Now this is the most important, now that's the most important, and that becomes a real big challenge. And then we can think at when we have a group of teams, let's call it a tribe, that's based on the Spotify model, but whatever you call, maybe it's a business area or a business unit, what have you, where we have a group of teams that are closely related, their mission should be clear as well, right? And I quite like the work of John Smart, who wrote the book Sooner, Safer, Happier. And one of the things he talks about is this idea of nested value streams. So if you think about most organizations, really at the top level, there might be 1, 2, 3, maybe up to 5 value streams. at a high level. So what does that mean? If you think of a bank, for example, a bank might have top-level value streams, including investment bank. They might have banking for consumers, and they might have banking for business, for companies, right? At the very high level, that's what they do, what the value they provide to their customers. And then you start to break that down into, okay, what exactly are the value streams within investment bank, for example? And you get to a point where you get to a level of value streams where you can actually map teams to that. Okay, for this value stream, in this example from banking industry, you have like cash equities. That's a value stream where we need some products to support that. And then we can start to map the teams and align teams to those products and to the streams within the products. So if we're talking for a consulting company, you might have some value streams don't look exactly like that. You might not be building products internally, but you might have, for example, one of your value streams might be, well, we help customers with digital transformation. That's maybe one top-level value stream. Or we help customers with adopting artificial intelligence. Or we help them create mobile products. And so those might be top-level value streams for a consulting organization. It might be also based on the industry of the customer, right? Maybe we only work with finance customers because we're specialized in understanding their type of problems. But we need some kind of alignment of groups of teams to this value stream approach, right? And then we need to align the teams inside the value stream with the different sort of services or streams that we provide. This is just a reference that you can check it out later. We created a very simple tool called independent service heuristics. And the point of this is when you have uncertainty and you say, okay, we have this value stream. We are supporting customers in digital transformation. But what are the different services we can provide within that so that we can then align teams to those services? And so there is a set of questions that we can ask about if this is a candidate service, how well does this candidate service answer these questions, right? We usually use this applied to actual products and potential services, but you could apply it to more consulting services as well. I don't see any reason why not. So there are some questions. I won't go through all of them, but does this candidate service make sense? As does it have? Can we get revenue and we understand the costs of this service? Could this thing run mostly independent from other services that we provide? And so these questions help us get a feeling if this is a good candidate, if this is a good investment to have a service and to have teams aligned to that service. So in fact, when you run this exercise with a group of people, you end up with something actually quite visual if you use whether it's online or a physical board, where you can see, well, yes, for this candidate service, most of the answers are green. That means probably this is a good candidate for us to invest in. If people are familiar with domain-driven design, are people familiar with domain-driven design a little bit? I see more or less half the people. This is sort of, if you like, a lightweight approach to domain-driven design. Obviously, understanding the domains of the customer, understanding what teams make sense, what are the different contexts for the business domains, etc. This is a simpler approach that helps us get started and often easier to talk with, let's say, business people at the customer for them to be engaged in this discussion. What exactly are the services that we provide? What could be the candidate services that are fairly independent from each other? So we apply this technique to get faster results and get alignment across the organization. Another really important aspect is trust and trust boundaries. So Robin Dunbar is an anthropologist, and he did a lot of research around what are the sizes of groups where we have more trust or less trust. And something that's called Dunbar's number is this fact that an individual social network, meaning how many meaningful relationships we can have, is within 100 to 200 individuals. So people usually talk about 150, but that's just the average. What it's really saying is that there is sort of a limit to the trust we can have in a group, and that's about 150 or between 100 to 200. That means people we know who they are, we can have a conversation with them. If we're in the same organization, we understand what is their role, how does their team relate to our team, and so on. So why is this important? Because if we understand, and there are different boundaries, right? I'm talking about sort of the 150 boundary. There are different boundaries that go from deep trust, where a group of about 5 individuals, where you can know them deeply, you know almost can predict what they're going to do, that kind of trust and understanding. And then you have different levels up to the 150, which is kind of a limit on our capacity to know all those 150 people and understand what they do, how we are related to them. So that's probably a good limit to keep in mind. And some organizations have done this very successfully when we're thinking about the tribes, to try to limit that to around 150. Obviously, it's not an absolute number, but when you have a tribe, we have a group of teams that are working in related things, if overall you start going beyond 200, 250, it starts to get very difficult to have good amount of trust between all those people. And this is a common problem I see in scale-ups, organizations that are doing well and they're growing. And they don't focus on, okay, at some point, we cannot expect to continue to work in the same way and have the same level of trust when we were 30, 40, 50 people as when we are 200, 250, 300. But I want to go back now to the topic of cognitive load, right? And what I propose is that we play a Tetris game. Hopefully, I suppose most people have played Tetris at least once in your life. I spent a lot of time playing Tetris when I was growing up. And actually, you can play it online on tetris.com. So the screenshots here are from tetris.com. And just last year, a fun fact, just last year was the first time that someone finished the Tetris game. So an American teenager got to the end of the game, and that's him like going berserk, going crazy. No one knew actually what the last screen would look like when you finish the game. So how do we play Tetris with team cognitive load? Well, let's imagine, Tetris, you have a canvas, you have pieces coming in, and you have to align them so that you make rows, and those rows disappear, right? Very simple, can be quite addictive as well. And so let's imagine the canvas is the team cognitive load. Then what are the pieces? Well, let's consider we're talking about this cross-functional teams that are trying to build digital products or providing some kind of services in an independent way. Some of those pieces might be, well, we have an architecture piece, we have an infrastructure piece, we have operations piece, right? All these different things that we expect one team to sort of manage, understand, and align to make the rows in Tetris, right? And obviously there's more. There's the actual coding, understanding frameworks, understanding security, a lot of things that we expect from this cross-functional team. And if you look at it, we're still just focusing on building whatever the solution is in the right way, with the right approach, with the right focus on, it needs to be secure, it needs to be automated, it needs to scale, all these things. But if you actually want a team to have this end-to-end ownership, understand what should we build, who are our customers, you're going to need a lot more things, right? You need to understand about product viability, how, user experience, a lot of things that come into play as well. if we want to build the right solution, not just that we're sort of taking what someone else decides and we're building it in the right way. Now we're talking about we actually understand enough of the business, of the customers, to figure out what we should build and experiment and improve over time. And the team should be the unit of delivery, right? The issue is that the team, if we want high trust teams, there's also this boundary of usually 5 to 9 team members. There are different reasons why this is sort of the size that makes sense for high-performing teams. But one of them, which is critical, is trust. For people to trust each other deeply, you go back to Dunbar's trust boundaries, and it's between, he says 5 to 15. Even with 15, it starts to get complicated because you have many lines of communication inside the team, and you tend to end up with sub-teams inside the larger team. So usually it's between 5 and 9. So we go back to the Tetris game. Okay, if we have a team of 5 to 9 people, how can we deal with all these pieces coming in and make sure we are, efficient and effective enough to deliver at a good pace? Well, we have all these other pieces that we're talking about, user experience. Maybe we need to have some insights on data science. Maybe we need to run some models to get some data. We need to understand product viability, we need to have an idea of customer satisfaction, and quickly we get to this overload, like the game is over. We have this overload, we're just struggling, we're trying to cope with all these demands. So we get to game over, we're just overloaded, 1 in 2 people have burnout, not a good place to be, right? So what can we do about it? If we don't want to go back to functional silos, which hopefully we don't want to go back to having the test team and the development team and all these different silos that becomes very slow to deliver value to the customer, then we need to look at, okay, how do we deal with cognitive load for the cross-functional teams? And that's where we need to go a bit deeper into understanding what is cognitive load. So this comes from the field of psychology. So John Sweller defined cognitive load as total amount of mental effort being used in the working memory. If you think of a team as a group of individuals, it starts as a group of individuals, needs to be more than that. That group of individuals is going to have a limit on their cognitive capacity as well, right? And how much load they have at any given time to execute some task, to deliver some value to the customer. But more interestingly, there are actually 3 different types of cognitive load. And they're not totally isolated, right? They're related to each other. But we can think about it in this way. There are intrinsic cognitive load, which has to do with the skills we need to do our day-to-day work, right? If we are programming in Java, then we need to know how Java works. We need to know how do I create new classes, how do I run tests, new Java frameworks. I know I'm old school, still talking about Java, but you get the point. So if you don't have those skills or you don't have the experience, then when you're trying to do those tasks, your intrinsic cognitive load is going up, right? I need to remember or I need to look it up. Maybe the Copilot's going to help me, but I still need to figure out what do I need to do. Then we have extraneous cognitive load. This is sort of related, or this is related to the environment where we work, right? And for many of you, maybe the environment is determined mostly by your end customer rather than your employer, if you're a consultant. But whatever the environment is around us is going to have an impact. If it's difficult to understand who do I need to talk to get this, access to some environment or database, that's extraneous cognitive load. If I have to follow a set of very strict, complicated instructions to deploy some change to my application into production, that's extraneous cognitive load, right? Some people sort of relate that to accidental complexity in some ways, right? Things that are not directly helping us provide the value to the user or to the customer, but are things we need to do today. And finally, there's germane cognitive load. That's when we're actually focusing on the business domain. We're actually understanding what are we trying to do? What is the value for our organization and for our customers? And germane has nothing to do with German. It's just coincidental, similar term. So if we understand these 3 different types of cognitive load, again, they're happening at the same time, right? It's not that our brain splits into 3 different parts. But we can understand that some things are more distractions and other things are more what we actually should be focusing on. And that's mostly the germane part, right? We need to reduce the intrinsic cognitive load. We need to have the skills to do the day-to-day work. We want to minimize as much as possible the extraneous cognitive load, the things that are distracting, that are keeping us away from the actual value of what we're providing, so we can focus more on the germane part. So what can we do to minimize cognitive load? The first thing is to assess it, have an idea of what's happening in our teams. And the challenge there is that we cannot measure cognitive load directly. I cannot ask you, what's your cognitive load right now? Well, it's 100 or it's 80, or it's not something we can measure like that. So we need to assess the drivers of team cognitive load. And there are many different drivers of cognitive load for teams. Actually, we've partnered with someone that has PhD in psychology and organizational psychology to try to understand what are some of these drivers. And there are actually 4 clusters or 4 areas of cognitive load drivers that we've identified. One has to do with the characteristics of the team, right? So typically teams that are quite big tend to generate more cognitive load, because it means we need to understand how we work internally as a team, because we have many people and we need to understand probably multiple customers that we're working for. That's why the team is this large, and those type of things. There's another cluster which has to do with the characteristics of the work. How is the work planned? How is the work executed? What kind of dependencies do we have on other teams or other parts of the organization? That can generate cognitive load as well. The third one are the practices and processes we follow. Are they easy to understand, and are things automated, or there's a lot of manual steps and things that we don't understand but we have to do anyway? That would be generating sort of the extraneous type of cognitive load. And the last sort of cluster is the work environment and tools, right? Do we have the right tools to do our work in the most effective way? Do we have the right environment? If we have to go to the office because there's a mandate everyone has to go back to the office, but we actually are much more effective working remotely because we have a better balance with our private life, whatever the case might be, those also can increase cognitive load on teams if we don't have the right environment and tools. So we've actually identified within each of these areas, there are 5, 6 different drivers. But it's just to give you an idea of what are the things that sometimes we're not even aware that are contributing to increased cognitive load on teams. We've actually built a product that's free for teams to use, which is doing this assessment of cognitive load on the team by asking a bunch of questions around those 4 areas. But it's something that you could also do internally. You could create your own sort of survey and think about these 4 areas. What are the questions we should have to understand what is influencing, what is creating cognitive load on our teams? So that's the first step, right? We need to have an idea what's happening, which teams are sort of suffering the most from cognitive load, what are some of the reasons why they have that high cognitive load, right? If we need to get that picture, otherwise it will be difficult to address it. The second thing we can do often is contributing to high cognitive load, has to do with the way we organize our software and architecture. I won't talk too much about this today, just a few slides, but it's a whole other topic that we could spend an hour on. But essentially, we would want to limit the size of the software services or products to the cognitive load that the team can handle, right? So instead of thinking from a purely technical perspective, whatever architecture we're thinking about for our products, whether it's, microservices or monolith or whatever it might be, is to think about, okay, how do we assign a sensible service and responsibility or part of a product to a team in a way that we're not going to clearly go over their cognitive capacity. And when we do that, when we take this as sort of a principle to organize our architecture of our products and services, we end up with something that looks kind of more like what you have on your right side, where you have architectures that where teams have similar sized services that they're responsible for. It's easier to see the dependencies between them, and that's versus what you see on your left side, which is what I've seen many times in my experience as consultant, where systems grow over time and evolve, and the boundaries become very unclear and very blurry, where you have some teams that are owning multiple parts of the system and they cannot cope with that. You have some parts of the system or services that are orphaned. No one knows how to change them. Sometimes only one person knows how to change this part of the system or service. And that creates all sorts of problems in terms of when we need to make changes, who is going to be responsible, but also the cognitive load on teams. So again, if we organize to limit the size of the services or software teams are responsible to match their cognitive capacity, we end up with something that looks much more like on the right side. And the other thing which is interesting about this picture is that actually at the very high level, you can look at this and say, well, this is our system architecture at the 10,000 feet view, but it's also in a way our team architecture, our team structures, right? The two things are pretty much aligned. And that's what Mel Conway found already many decades ago, that he wrote a paper where he said, any organization that designs a system defined broadly will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. So what does this really mean? Essentially it means there is this force that the way we are organized as teams and groups of teams is going to have a very strong impact on the actual systems that we're able to build and deliver, right? And it's not that we cannot build systems that are very different from the team structures, it's just going to be that much harder. And we're going to have to be sort of fighting and going through a lot of dependency issues and integration issues and all that. So to give you a very simplistic example, but if we want sort of get to an architecture where we have teams that are mostly independent, they can work on their own service, and they have their own sort of end users and customers that they understand well, then we need, from a team perspective, to be organized in that way as well, right? Have teams with the right skills to be able to own that service or microservice or whatever it might be. So that is another important aspect, especially when we're working with large systems, or we're helping our customers with their large systems, is to try to align the architecture and to have services or subsystems or whatever might be that are the right size for the teams that own them, right? And last but not least, we get into more of the team organization part. What are some adequate topologies to address the overload on teams? So topologies is a sort of funny word that is quite common in people working in networking, right? But actually is the way different parts of a system are related or interconnected, if you like. How are they arranged together? So effectively, we're talking about how different types of teams are related and interact to address problems of cognitive load in this case and deliver value quickly to our customers. So we already talked about streamlined teams. That's kind of the starting point. These teams with end-to-end ownership will be the ones that are able to deliver value to the customer faster without handoffs of work to other teams. That is our starting point. So if we want to have fast flow, we would expect most teams to be streamlined and aligned to those streams of value with end-to-end ownership. Again, maybe not every organization is looking to achieve this, but most organizations are. They want fast flow of value to the customers. So this is the starting point for that. But then we come into the cognitive load problem, and that's where other types of teams can help. So effectively, actually in team topologies, there are 3 more types of teams, and they're all focused on how do we reduce cognitive load on the streamlined teams. That is, if you like, their primary goal. And the first type of teams are enabling teams. So these are usually small teams of experts in some domain, right? They can be a team of experts in data science, or they can be experts in design and user experience. They could be experts in other areas that are not engineering related. They could be experts in legal or experts in sales, for example. The point of these teams is to work together with the streamlined teams and basically upskill them, help them increase their capacities in that domain, right? Not that we expect every streamlined team to be experts in everything, but that they get a baseline understanding of those capabilities, whatever they need, design, or they need to know a bit about sales, or they need to have an understanding of, privacy regulations to do their work more effectively. So the enabling teams effectively reduce the learning curve to acquire capabilities in the streamlined teams, and reduce also the need that is very common for this, what I call shared experts. People who usually are splitting their time between 3, 4, 5 teams, and they're trying to help different teams execute and do for example, the design part. Well, the UX team is going to do the design for the different applications. And actually that, on one hand, is not very effective, because it means now every team is sort of competing for that shared expert to have availability to help them. And it's also painful for those people in those positions, usually, because, again, their cognitive load goes up. I have to help this team today, and tomorrow that other team that has a completely different problem, and so on. So if we can have the experts in that domain work as an enabling team, that's much more effective. And the way they work is, again, by teaching and mentoring the streamlined teams on the ground, helping them know enough to be more independent, to be more autonomous. And these enabling teams actually improve the experience for their customers, in the sense that if they are working as a team, they're looking for what is the best way to help multiple teams understand about sales, for example, if you need to do sales in your teams. Like, how do we help teams understand enough that they can be more efficient at communicating the value of what they do? When you have shared experts, individuals that are then allocated to different teams, you also can have very different experiences with different people. With person A, well, they were very communicative, they were very good at explaining things, and it was easy to understand. But then person B has a different personality and they work in a different way. It was not very easy to work with them as an expert, right? But if those experts are in the same team, they're finding ways that are common in how do we help others. Whether it's, we need to create some common training, or we need to have common ways to help the streamlined teams. This whole topic of enabling teams can go, again, could be another whole talk, depending on the domain, right? If it's something that is very broad, like if these days we're talking a lot about artificial intelligence, that might be a domain where we actually need to think about how do we grow the enabling teams to build these artificial intelligence capabilities in our organization, right? So there are, we have a whole course which is about that, like how do we kickstart, measure impact, and scale the enabling teams when you have a big domain, right? A domain that is quite large. Could be also, for example, data science is a typical domain where if we work as enabling teams, it's going to be much more effective than if we have data science as the responsibility of only a few teams. There will become a bottleneck. So back to the Tetris game, what does the enabling team mean? Well, for us as a stream-aligned team or a product team, if you like, this means now we have better understanding of how do we deal with these different pieces that are coming in. We have better understanding of design, or we have a better understanding of infrastructure or data science, whatever it might be. So as a team, we're able to cope better with when those pieces coming in our game, right? The second type of team that helps reduce cognitive load are platform teams or groups of platform teams. These have been around for a long time, obviously. What is different is the focus on cognitive load, right? It's not about building platforms with shared services and shared tooling. Yes, that ends up being sort of part of the implementation, but the primary focus that we're talking about is platform teams that help reduce cognitive load and accelerate the streamlined teams so they can deliver with more autonomy. And in some cases, a platform doesn't even need to be actual running services. Could be a wiki page that provides guidance on how to use this cloud provider, or what's a good approach to configure our service. That could be considered a platform if it's done in a way that helps the streamlined teams understand what do we need to do and be more autonomous. Obviously, usually ends up being, and today there's a lot of talk about platform engineering. It usually ends up being an actual platform composed of running services. We align very much with the definition from Evan Butcher of a digital platform as the foundation of self-service APIs, tool services, knowledge and support arranged as a compelling internal product. So there's this underlying idea of treating your internal platform as a product, right? And that is key if we want to reduce cognitive load on streamlined teams. We need to know what is affecting them, what is preventing our streamlined teams to go faster, what kind of services would be helpful to abstract some of the complexities that maybe they should not have to worry about. And effectively, we're also reducing the amount of what we call blocking dependencies, right? If you think about more traditional setup where you might have, for example, an infrastructure team who owns the infrastructure and are the ones who makes changes to that, then if you have a streamlined team or a product team that now requires a change to the infrastructure where the application runs on, they might come to a stop and say, okay, can you do this for us? And now we have to sit and wait for the infrastructure team to give us an answer and implement that change, right? So we start introducing wait time, so that slows down our delivery of value. And we start introducing dependencies, blocking dependencies between teams, which also increase our cognitive load as a team. So the platform done right in that approach, as Evan Butcher is talking about, of this self-service approach with proper documentation or guidance, obviously help and support as well, then you should get to something that looks more like what's at the bottom, non-blocking dependencies, meaning, yes, we use this platform to help us accelerate, to help us do things faster and have less of the extraneous type of cognitive load. So we don't have to worry about a lot of the details around maybe how the infrastructure works, or we don't have to worry about details on how the monitoring works. Whatever the platform provides, we use that, but we don't depend on the platform team to get things done. We, as a streamlined team, are responsible. We can use the infrastructure service, the monitoring, the CI/CD, or could even be sort of design-related services where we can do the design ourselves using these assets and this guidance that is providing in a sort of design platform, for example. So what we're trying to do is to remove barriers to flow, whether that's handoffs of work between teams or sometimes who needs to approve. Can we remove these approval gates? Can we automate some of these things? Or can we figure out why our teams not trusted to make these decisions by themselves? And we want to replace that as much as possible with self-service, APIs, tools, or portals, whatever it might be. A few years ago, there was quite an interesting survey called State of DevOps. And that's a survey that's been running for over a decade, I believe. But in 2021, they actually asked people and hundreds of organizations questions around how they were organized, what types of teams they had. And one of the things they found is that highly evolved or mature firms, companies, use a combination of streamlined teams and platform teams as the most effective way to manage cognitive load at scale. And if you think about it, and if you think about extraneous and germane cognitive load, that kind of makes sense, right? If we have a team that should be focusing on the end product for our customers, but they have to spend a lot of time with infrastructure, they have to spend a lot of time with monitoring tools, and for example, that is actually a distraction for them. We should be able to do that in a more effective way with a platform. And for the platform teams, that is actually their germane cognitive load. That's the thing we need to focus on, is how do we give a better infrastructure service, or how do we provide a better monitoring service in that example, right? So that is germane for the platform teams, but would be extraneous and distracting for the streamlined teams. That's why this combination works quite well. So in a way, the platform, it's almost like some of these pieces don't come into the Tetris game. We don't have to worry about all the details about some of these pieces. Yes, we are accountable. We are the owners of our architecture. We are the owners of our infrastructure, our monitoring as a streamlined team, but we have the tools so that we don't have to know all the details. And finally, the last sort of supporting type of team are complicated subsystem teams. These teams build and evolve part of a system which requires specialized PhD kind of knowledge. And it's quite important to keep this in mind, that we should keep to a minimum complicated subsystem teams, because we don't want to go back to when we had a lot of component teams. Well, where a component team means we are the owners of some part of a system where many other teams depend on this component. And that creates all sorts of bottlenecks and problems for fast flow. But we realize that sometimes there are really complicated algorithms. If you think about real-time trading, for example, those systems are really complicated, and you have really, you need specialists, people with PhD usually, to work on that. But we try to keep this type of teams to a minimum because of the danger of them becoming a bottleneck to others. I think the Tetris analogy here is almost like if you're trying to provide a service or a product as a streamlined team, and there's part of that service or product that is so complicated that you actually need full-time PhD people, if you try to do all that in the same team, it's like if you would have, I don't know, 10 different pieces coming into the Tetris game at the same time. It's like almost sudden game over. And in those specific cases, we do need this complicated subsystem team. And I'm getting to the end. I just wanted to talk a little bit about a case study, an example from a company which called Capra. They're a consulting company in Norway. I think they have about 150, 200 people. And a few years back, they read team topologies and they thought this makes a lot of sense for us as a whole organization, not just the teams working on the customer projects, but actually internally as well. And so the first thing they did was try to understand what are our main value streams. If you remember the initial part, like what are the top level value streams for us as a consulting company in Norway. And so they realized actually it's hiring, because there's constant movement and people leaving, people joining, building expertise in our consultants, and it's delivering customer services, obviously, actually providing the work to the customers. And they have a quite interesting article in Norwegian, but if you translate to English, it kind of it's understandable. And this is the picture that, don't try to read it. It was very hard for me to try to make sense of it. Actually, if you just look at the colors, essentially most of the teams are sort of in that yellow. Those are stream-aligned teams working, executing for the value stream that they are part of. And then you have a few enabling teams. That's the sort of purple, this one here and that other one. And they have a bunch of sort of platform teams, the blue ones at the bottom. So let's zoom in one of those blue teams. That's actually the leadership team, right? So that's interesting. One thing they did was to have the leadership team, which was more traditional, like, yes, the CTO and the CEO making decisions and what is the strategy and what are we going to invest in and all that. And they started thinking about themselves first as an enabling team or doing enabling work, but also as a platform team. So what did they do? They started by sort of enabling the teams, the stream-aligned teams, to sort of explain to them what is the strategy of the company, where do we want to expand, what kind of expertise do we want to build to serve this strategy and the types of customers we're trying to get to. And then sort of a platform approach in the sense of they actually created some Miro boards for strategy and metrics. And those boards are used by the stream-aligned teams. They are the owners. The stream-aligned teams are the owners. And what this team does, remember this was the CEO, CTO, etc., is they help the stream-aligned teams understand and use those Miro boards, like understand what drives our company, what are what is the goals and the strategy, so that the stream-aligned teams can make better decisions themselves with more autonomy. Because now we understand what is the direction, what is the mission, and now we also understand what type of metrics make sense for us from a business perspective, and they can use this boards effectively to make better decisions. So that's quite interesting. I would say not every organization is going to go and let's apply these ideas and these types of teams to everything. But you can actually get quite interesting results when even teams that are not in engineering, maybe sales or finance, start to think in this way. What can we help the stream-aligned teams with? How much would they need to know to be able to make more decisions and execute things more autonomously, right? So taking this sort of platform and enabling approach to what we do, rather than an execution approach. And finally, we have the 4 types of teams, but those teams need to work together, right? So we need to understand what's the best, or what are some ways in which we can think about our interactions. And that's where we talk about 3 very concrete interaction modes, where 2 teams might be collaborating for a period of time when you have a shared problem that you want to address, when you want to find more innovative solutions. You can collaborate for a period of time, but it's a very specific thing where we have a specific goal, right? It's not just open-ended collaboration. And then we have acts as a service, where it's typical for platform teams. We provide something that other teams consume, right? And then the question is this thing easy enough to understand? Does it actually help the stream-aligned teams do their work more autonomously and faster? And if not, maybe we need to collaborate with them more to understand better their needs, their use cases, their problems. And the last one, facilitating, is typical for enabling teams, but it could happen also between some teams that are more experienced and other teams that are more junior or less experienced, where one team provides knowledge and helps upskill the other team. It's important to set the sort of the ground rules for these interactions. Why are we having this interaction? Even collaboration, for example, is actually kind of expensive. If we are collaborating with another team, it means we need to have a broader context. We need to understand more what the other team does. And that means we're probably going to go slower on our own backlog or whatever we're working on for our own part of the product or system, right? So we should have clarity. Why are we doing this interaction? How long do we expect it to take? How do we know it when it's over? And then we can have these sort of diagrams. They're just snapshots. It's not, this doesn't represent like the organizational model or structure. It's just, here's a group of teams. They're interacting in this way to achieve certain goals. Maybe we're facilitating to help some teams learn more about design. We're collaborating to figure out what should be part of the platform to help the streamline teams and so on. So those are the 3 key points I would like you to take away from today. Once we understand better what is cognitive load on teams, then we can actually start to make changes and start by assessing what is the landscape, what is causing teams cognitive load, start to identify some patterns likely. Well, most teams are overloaded because they don't have a clear mission. They don't really understand who should they be focused on, what customers they should be focused on. The second thing is then we can act on the architecture of our systems, especially if you're working on large systems or products, align the architecture of the system with the architecture of the teams. That's going to make it much easier to evolve and go faster. And finally, think about team topologies. There's no one answer, like this is exactly the way you have to organize. But what we've seen today are some base patterns and principles as well, but patterns that we can apply and put together to actually figure out what makes sense in our current situation, what types of teams would make sense, what types of interactions do we need to have between different teams. And so I hope this is a good starting point for you and maybe to help your customers as well think about these things. And yeah, I'll be around for a little bit. And this is our main website if you want more resources around team topologies. And I'm happy to answer questions if we have time.